So I'd like to introduce our afternoon invited speaker. His name's Ron Thompson. He comes from ePlan Services in Denver, Colorado. He's got 30 years experience in the industry, serving as an agile coach and software engineer.
Hello, everybody. Wow, that was loud. Glad you could make it here after lunch. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I am a product owner and also a former home brewer, and I love to consume yeast byproducts of all types. And so when I saw the conference theme about brewing quality software, I was pretty excited because it lets me combine a couple of my passions. So I started out my career as a programmer. There I was solving technical problems, which grew into a real fascination with delivering business value. In the early 90s, I worked for the local gas and electric utility in what we called the development center. And in the development center, we were really focused on process and methodology, trying to get the process right. And I always felt like there was something missing. So then I went from there to a large waterfall mainframe project, building an electronic tax payment system. And unbelievably, we actually delivered the payment subsystem of that big system using iterative and incremental processes with COBOL. So you can imagine, if you can do it with COBOL, you can probably do it with just about anything else. I went from there to Microsoft, and I worked as a program manager. And I learned a lot about driving vision and making trade-offs. And I started to really develop some ideas around how do you go about delivering business value. I then got a chance to lead a group and aptly named it Product Delivery, and got really focused on how do we determine the right requirements to deliver. And also started to think about, you know, there's this whole introduction of the product out to the business users. So how do we do that? And I kind of went around to a variety of other jobs after that. You know, I worked strategic partnerships, did some project oversight, and became a project manager. And the funny thing as a project manager was that I always hired a project administrator to actually manage the project, because I spent my time kind of facilitating between the engineering team and the business team, and kind of providing that glue in between. So I always needed somebody to actually manage the project for me. And then finally now, I'm in what I'd consider kind of my dream job. I'm a product owner with ePlan Services, a small company in Denver that does 401k records keeping services. And they have a very mature agile practice. They've been agile now for a little over 10 years. So it's very mature, and in fact, the entire company kind of thinks in terms of agile. So one of the things I realized is that in each one of these jobs, I was really doing approximately the same thing. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I've spent most of my career really focused on what I consider to be a really overlooked player in the software development business, which is the product owner. So I'm really happy to see a growing emphasis on product ownership and that part of the project. Today I'll use a lot of Scrum and Agile terms because most of my work today is with Scrum teams. However, anything that I'm talking about today works on any type of project, whether it be agile or traditional type. In fact, the big waterfall project that I talked about, I applied a lot of these concepts there, and that was 20 plus years ago. So the first agile term is we have a story card. And the story that kind of drove this presentation for me was, as a product owner, I want to have more impact on increasing product quality. So today I'd like to propose a very specific role for the product owner, one that goes a little bit beyond what you see in traditional methodologies. So a show of hands from everybody. Who here is a product owner? Have I got any product owners? All right, I've got some product owners. And now, who happens to be a tester? Hey, I got a few of those. How about some other developers? Have I got some developers? Good, good. So that's a good group. So the next question is, if you're not a product owner, how many of you work with product owners? Oh, okay, that's good. Got a good group. Okay, so today I'm really hoping that if you're a product owner, I give you maybe a couple of different ways to look at the role. If you work with product owners, I hope maybe I can tweak your expectations a little bit. And if you don't work with a product owner, I hope I maybe raise your expectations. So today we'll talk about three things. First is, what makes a good product owner? The second is, how do they influence the product? And third is, what's the relationship between the product owner and quality? And very specifically, I'll talk a little bit about the relationship between the product owner and the test team. So the title of my talk talked about brewer's yeast. So I'll start with a little discussion about yeast and its role in brewing. So yeast converts sugars into alcohol, CO2, and several other byproducts that create flavor. If anybody got a chance to see the Basecamp presentation yesterday, he covered that whole process very well and talked about all the different ways that they develop flavor. So the key thing is that for different yeast, you'll get different flavors of beer. Just like different product owners will develop different flavors of software. The other area where I like to compare the two is both yeast and the product owner really get the product started. So first, I'd like to look at the issues with the product owner role. So a show of hands, again, all of you who are product owners or are working with product owners, how many are really happy with the role? 100% happy with the role. Yeah, kind of saw a few. There are a few issues. So the first set of issues have to do with the definition of product owner. So one of my pet peeves is that when people talk about product owners, they often talk about how they just produce a prioritized backlog, as if that happens by magic. The next issue is that the product owner is often very separate from the team in most definitions. They're really viewed as an outsider. Third, and this is a great book, by the way, inspired by Marty Kagan. It's a great book about the product development process, product design process. However, there's one area where I really disagree with him. And that's, he equates a product owner with a product manager. And that has a few problems that I'll talk about in a little bit. Something somewhat related to this is there's also the idea that I can pull my product owner from the business team, either as a multi-headed stakeholder group that becomes a product owner, or even worse, by taking one of the people from a single line of business and making them the product owner. So also, I ran into an article by Roman Pichler about common mistakes. So these are issues that are caused in practice of how the role is used. So the first is where I have a product owner who lacks engagement with the project. This could happen because the product owner just doesn't have time, like in the case where they're a member of the business team. Or it might be they're geographically separated. My predecessor at ePlan Services was the product owner, but was also the compliance manager. So you can imagine the types of stories that were coming into the team. The priority of the compliance stories tended to be a little higher than the operations stories. The next area is where the product owner lacks authority. So in this case, this might be the product owner, the folks out in the business are too busy to really work with the team, and so they have a junior person go represent them with the development team as the product owner. But they always have to come back and get decisions and get priorities and have no latitude to make decisions on their own. And then the last one is what I call the lack of accountability. So in this case, the product owner is a proxy for the business. And in this case, the product owner has too much power, so they don't ever have to go back to the business to get decisions. So one thing that's true of all good consultants is that consultants have to come up with a brand name for just about everything, especially if it just makes good common sense. And today, I promise to be no different. I've been inventing names for this product owner role for about 20 years. I went from business architect to program manager to product delivery, among others. I really like the one I'm about to use. While product owner is a very accepted role, name for the role in the business, and I often use that too, for the most part I use that, I'm proposing a very specific definition of the product owner role that goes a little beyond what you see traditionally. Because I often work with Scrum teams and am a former rugby player, I've borrowed from that metaphor. And my term for the role is an Agile Scrum Half. So why Agile Scrum Half? Well, the Scrum Half in rugby is the player that you see that puts the ball into the scrum and then receives the ball out of the scrum and makes a pass. So as an Agile Scrum Half, I think this addresses a lot of the issues that we talked about. So the focus for the Agile Scrum Half is inward on the product development process. They're not a proxy. They're not a BA, but they have a lot of those same characteristics. To be honest, they're not really a product owner. If you look at who owns the product, it's those folks out in the business that are doing the work every day, that are using that product. They own the product. But the Agile Scrum Half facilitates those stakeholders to get decisions, to get priorities. And they're a facilitator. They're not a stand-in. They're not taking the place of the business folks who really understand it well. What I do in my job is I spend a lot of time bringing the right business folks into the process at the right time, whether it be decisions, whether it be priorities, whether it be answering questions. So let's talk a little bit about what the Agile Scrum Half does for a living. This is what I view as the primary responsibility for an Agile Scrum Half, is to get to predictable and sustainable delivery of highest business value. So there are a couple things there. One is predictable. You often hear in Agile, we don't know when it's going to be finished. We're going to keep working on it, we're going to do the stories, but we don't know exactly when it's finished. I've found that executive management doesn't really like that answer. And so getting a little bit predictable, breaking stories to the right size, that type of thing, really helps with answering those questions. Not commitments, but predictions. Sustainable is because the delivery really has to go on uninterrupted. I find that it's a constant challenge to stay just far enough ahead of the team. I try to avoid doing unnecessary work because I never know if a story is going to be a priority, so I don't want to overdo that, but I want to do just enough to keep it moving through the prioritization process and have it just in time ready for the team when it's time. So now let's talk about some of the key characteristics of a good Agile Scrum Half. First of all, an Agile Scrum Half has to be a good facilitator. I talked a little bit about that, and I'll talk a little bit more. They have to be what I call bilingual. You have to be able to translate between the business and the engineering team. So you have to be able to speak both languages comfortably. You have to have a little bit of project manager in you, because there's a lot of tasks that have to be done at the right times. You have to be good at business analysis, and you have to know a lot about the business. You also have to be a good decision maker. And this is both knowing when to make a decision, the day-to-day type of decisions, and when not to make a decision. But it's being very decisive and knowing what you want. And then finally, I think one of the key characteristics is the love of learning. You have to want to learn about the business every day. So now, what are the critical skills that are needed by an Agile Scrum Half? Well, first of all, I mentioned earlier, you've got to be a facilitator. So as a facilitator, you're facilitating stakeholders all the time to get priorities, to get decisions across the organization. They don't often agree, so you have to be able to facilitate and get good decisions. I find that the Agile Scrum Half, or the product owner, is really the equivalent of what a Scrum Master does for the team. They facilitate that team to help them be productive. And the Agile Scrum Half, or product owner, does that for the business stakeholders rather than the team. Okay, so who here is a fan of the Big Bang Theory? I know whenever you're in a geek conference, there's a lot of those. I am too. As I was binge watching the series recently, I came across this one episode that I think really did a good job explaining what I mean by a value-added translator. So in this episode, Raj has a first date with a girlfriend who happens to be deaf. And Howard goes along on the date, and he signs for Raj and the girlfriend. So one of the things that struck me about this, that really brought it home about the whole idea of a value-added translator, is that Howard was never signing exactly what Raj said. He was keeping him out of trouble the entire time. He was saying the things maybe that he should have said or simplified. And one of my favorite lines in the whole thing was when Raj says, "Tell her her eyes shimmer like opalescent lilies in the lakes of the palace of the celestial maidens." And Howard signs, "I like your eyes." So, value-added translator, I find myself doing that a lot. I have the engineering team and the business team. They're not really speaking the same language. So I'll be off with one of them saying, "Okay, I know that's what they said, but here's what it means." So value-added translator is an important skill. The next skill is the ability to be a jester. If you're not familiar with the jester role, down through history and literature, the jester, there's some other names, joker or fool, is the one person who can tell truth to those in power. They ask the tough question, and they can look at things a little differently. So the jester skills are very important when you're in the product owner or Agile Scrum Half role. I could probably do the entire talk on the role of the jester, but I'll leave that till next year. But I can tell you the rallying cry of the jester, which is raise status quo to the appropriate level. So now let's get to the most critical skill that an Agile Scrum Half has to have. It's what I call the BS detector. The way I do that is I do research. I check on regulations. I observe the process. I get in and actually test the system to see what it does. I get on and into the database and I run queries to see what data's there. I do back of the envelope calculations to figure out, what are they saying? Does it make sense? In Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman writes about an intuitive, fast thinking, what he calls system 1 in the brain. And then there's a logical, slower thinking, what he calls a system 2. I really feel like the Agile Scrum half and the test team is the process, or is the system 2, is the logical thinking part of the process. So let's do a little exercise. So to illustrate the need to overcome your intuitive and natural tendencies. So we'll do a quick exercise here. I've got 2 problems that I pulled from Thinking Fast and Slow. So the first one is, together a bat and ball cost $1.10. A bat cost $1 more than a ball. How much is the cost of a ball alone? So quick think. 5 cents. How many people here got the answer right away without having seen the problem before? No. How many people immediately thought 5 cents, even if you got, or 10 cents, even if you got the right answer? Yeah, it's the intuitive part of your brain quickly makes that decision. So the next problem is, if 5 machines make 5 widgets in 5 minutes, how long does it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? The answer, of course, is 5 minutes. I think you deserve a prize. There you go. The answer, of course, is 5. But again, how many immediately thought 100? How many immediately thought 100? Exactly. That's a good illustration of how your logical side needs to take over and overrule the intuitive side, because the intuitive side will make a quick pattern-based decision. And again, that's where I see the role of both the product owner and also the test team. So the range of responsibilities for an Agile Scrum half are stories in. That's pretty much classic definition of a product owner in any of the Agile literature or methodologies. But in my view, they're also responsible for the product going out and getting that used. That's a key part of the role. In my view, the Agile Scrum half does whatever's necessary to fill that gap in between the business team and the engineering team. So they work with the business folks to ensure that things are ready for the released features. How many product owners out there do this? Good. How many have product owners that do this? Yeah, that's what I thought. So again, the key responsibilities for an Agile Scrum half, they work with the engineering team. They put the ball into the Scrum. So how do you do that as an Agile Scrum half? Well, prioritize backlog is obviously a big part of that. Writing acceptance tests are a great way to get the ball into the Scrum. Getting answers and decisions. Facilitating priorities across the organization. So any product owners, are there anything I missed there that you do as part of your role? That pretty well covers it. On the other side, unlike the classic definition of a product owner, the Agile Scrum half is responsible for introducing the product out. So they receive the ball from the Scrum and pass it. So here, you're working with business teams and to introduce the product. So in my job, I'm often working with people like the training manager or operations managers to help them be prepared and get ready for products coming out. Salespeople, so that they know what's coming. That can be through demos, that can be working through training material, you name it. But it's basically just trying to get them to where they're prepared. So I said earlier that I used to play rugby a few years ago. I was a fly half. And the fly half in rugby is the person that receives the ball from the scrum half first, normally. So I really appreciate the importance of this part of the process. Because when you play rugby, the fly half gets hit really hard when the scrum half doesn't introduce the ball very well. So one of the issues with getting products introduced is that's a very difficult thing. People do not like change. I think Dostoevsky said it well when he said, "Man grows used to everything." How often do you see that in the business? You introduce product that's wonderful. It's going to fix every problem in the world. And nobody will use it, right? Have you had that? Have you had that happen? So overcoming this is probably one of the more important parts of the role of being an Agile Scrum Half. So I said I'd talk a little bit about the product owner versus product manager role. The difference in my mind is that a product manager is very outward facing. So a product manager is looking to the market. They're looking for what the market wants. They're looking at a longer term roadmap, trying to decide where to go. They're looking at the product direction. So where are we going to take the product? And in my experience, a lot of product managers also have profit and loss type responsibilities. As a product owner, or an Agile Scrum Half, I'm very inward facing. I'm looking at how do we deliver the product. So I'm thinking about customers and users. How do they use the product? How does it, what do they need on the day-to-day basis? I'm looking at near-term plans. So how do I get stories into the team? How do we get stories out? It's all about product delivery. So what about making other business folks the product owner? I think I mentioned that earlier as one of the issues that sometimes arises. That suffers from several of the same problems. The business folks might have a very narrow view of the world. They're probably focused on their area of the business. They're really way too busy with their daily work. To ask somebody who is focused on customers all day long and trying to make money for the company, to ask them to be 100% dedicated as well to a project where we're building new product or trying to improve the existing product is asking a lot. So it helps to have some help there. They're also very outward facing. So again, like the product manager, they're looking outward at their customers. They're not looking at the development process. So the one thing here that I want to kind of leave you with is that product owner is an essential role. The product owner role needs the proper attention. It can't just be tacked on with other duties. So I want to stop for just a second. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Any curiosities about the There are prizes for asking questions. Yes?
So would you see your back line as your auxiliary roles, or is that the customer? You're talking about your scrum half, your fly half. Do you have them in mind of a role, or just trying to work through that whole analogy?
Oh, okay. The question was about the rugby analogy. So is the back line. Anybody unfamiliar with rugby, there's behind the scrum, there's a line of backs who generally are the ones running the ball down the sideline, trying not to get hit by one of the big guys in the scrum. So the question was about, to take the analogy a little further, who's in the back line? And that really is the customers. That's the customers, that's the business users, the people that we're developing the product for. So again, it's the scrum half is getting the ball out of the scrum, they're getting the ball to those folks so that they can do something with it.
What I like about that concept then is scrum halves often give back to their forward group. So that concept of if it's not ready, your customer's not there, giving it back to your developers of something may need to be worked out more.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, question, wins a prize. Any other questions? Yes?
Our software architect is now our product owner.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
The question is, our product architect is now our product owner. Does that make sense? I'm using this technique of, repeating the question slowly so I can think about it. No. No, definitely not. Their focus is completely different. I think the presentation that David Hussman did this morning was fantastic. I hope everybody got to see it. But one of the diagrams he showed was he was showing product discovery and product delivery kind of on two separate lines. And the business or the architect's really in that bottom line of product delivery, where in my view the product owner or the Agile Scrum half is right on that line, making things go back and forth efficiently and effectively. So, anything else? Yes?
One of the things I've noticed is that the product owner
Oh, you have one.
is typically on a different salary structure and a bonus structure than the rest of the Scrum team. So, regardless of how they interact and how well the job they do, there's generally quite a difference in what kind of salaries benefit, and so that can tend to kind of make the personality relationship with the team impacted, and also maybe some decisions are made based on where they think they're going to be more successful with their own personal.
Right.
And I don't know, that's probably nothing we can solve today.
We'd like to. So the question was, I'll try to summarize the question. The question is, often the product owner is on a different salary scale from the development team. And does that cause issues or anything like that? And it definitely does. It can cause issues. It's the classic example from traditional projects where the BA, the business analyst, was always kind of viewed as a junior wannabe programmer. And I find that happens with product owners, is they're viewed as somebody who hasn't quite gotten good enough to be a programmer yet, so they fill that role. I hope that one of the things that I'm really I leave you with today is that there's enough importance to this role that it should have that kind of respect. As far as salary scale, I don't know that we'll get there anytime quickly, but at least we should start to see more respect for the role. So, any other? Yes.
You see the product owner as being someone that's involved in the day-to-day agile process from stand-ups to, retrospectives, because it seems like it's the product manager that seems to fill that role. So where does the product owner fit in that picture?
Okay, so the question was, sorry, I'm behind. I'm behind on my, my prizes here. Whoa, okay. See, now that was the bad pass that causes somebody to get hit hard. So the question, I'll try to summarize the question. It's, where does the product owner fit in with the Scrum team? And I mentioned that earlier, how in most definitions, the product owner is outside of the Scrum team. And I'll be honest, I do kind of respect that line. So I don't view that the product owner is truly part of the delivery team. However, they're very involved. So for me, I attend every stand-up as part of the team. So I'm inside the circle for all the stand-ups, because my work in getting answers on stories and detailing out stories is just as important to progress as anything else that's going on in the sprint. So I do. That was different. When I first got to ePlan, the product owner was not a part of the stand-up. And I quickly discovered that that just didn't work. And so I asked to be part of the stand-up. Part of the retrospective, we don't actually, the product owner doesn't do retrospective first. The retrospectives, I'm a part of the retrospective, because again, I've been heavily involved in the sprint, and so I'm part of the retrospective. So I feel pretty strongly that a product owner should be part of the team for those things. There's a fine line, because you aren't, I don't do estimates. In the estimation meetings, I talk about the stories. I introduce the stories to get estimates. I take those estimates away, and that's part of the whole predictable part, is I really just take the estimates to have some idea, how long it might take if all goes well, kind of how many other caveats can I use. So I don't estimate the stories. I don't really have any say in the estimation. So the retrospectives and then the sprint demo, I kind of see that as the product owner's role is to do a sprint demo. We don't do it that way at ePlan, mostly because it's the chance for the team to really get the whole company together. The company has about 50 people total. We sit in the middle of the operations area, so we have all the customer service people, and they come in 2 shifts to the demos. So we do 2 demos every sprint, and the team does the demo. And I'm okay with that, because it allows the team to kind of shine. It gets them to show off what they just did. I work with those folks all the time, and I'll follow up on things that are being introduced that maybe they need a little more help with, but I let the team kind of take those. So hope that answers. There's a question in the back?
A tactical question. How do you get product owners to work together?
Product owners to work together.
So maybe a feature that crosses some
Right.
teams.
Right. Okay, the question is, how do you get product owners to work together? The kind of flip answer is you do what I do, which is you find a company small enough where you're the only product owner. That's really the best way. I've got to be honest, I don't have any great answers. I think some of the ideas that David was talking about earlier, about being responsible for whole processes and things like that may help that, but that's a tough problem. Our parent company has become agile, and they're about 50 times our size. And so instead of having one development team, we have 4 developers and 3 testers. And we have 1 DBA. We actually have 2, and they alternate sprints. So we have a very small team. The parent company has a very large team. And so they're having to deal with all of those problems. And so I get to watch that from afar. But I apologize. I don't have a great answer for you. But you do win a prize.
Just a comment on that question. It is not necessarily a good thing to remove that tension. That dynamic tension can work for the company because it's their job to set priority to the value that's about to be delivered. And if they get along too well, you can have agreements that are not necessarily right for the company. So the real value of that dynamic tension is that it exists outside of the development environment. Once they come to an agreement or have to escalate to the product management team, once that priority agreement is set, then the engineers and the developers and the QA get to say how something is done. It's not up to us to even care about the priority of what, only that it is set. So as long as they keep that tension outside of the development and QA environments, then the job's done.
Did everybody hear that answer? That was a wonderful answer. Would you like to come up and give the rest of the presentation? So I guess to summarize the answer, the tension that you have with multiple product owners in a larger company is actually a good thing because they're working through priorities across the business. It's good if it's outside of the product team, delivery teams. So if it starts to bleed into the product delivery teams and there isn't some clarity on priorities, then that can be a problem. In my experience, that's one of the things that's been probably most difficult for us to work through. As a small team with only 7 on the team, 4 developers, we can't do everything we'd like to do. We're in a similar line of business to our parent company. We have about 4,000 401k plans that we support. They have about 60,000. So one of the interesting things when I went up to the headquarters at one point was I was walking around in the area where the Scrum teams are supporting their 401k line of business. So in their 401k line of business, they had 8 teams doing the breadth of work that our team was doing. And that just finally brought it home to me that we have to be really good at determining priorities, much better than they do, because they can get 1 out of 8, 2 out of 8 wrong, and still do some pretty good stuff. If we get 1 out of 8, 2 out of 8 wrong, we've lost an entire quarter of the year. And so we really can't get it wrong. So the whole idea of priorities, and so we really push our stakeholders to have to set priorities and make tough trade-offs. And that's one of the things that we probably do a little more than somebody with a large team. Yes?
We have a chief engineer that does a lot of the things that you're talking about the product owner doing. And the product owner seems more distant and doesn't make as many of those decisions. Can you talk about that?
Okay, so the question was, can't see your name, but Kevin, they have a chief engineer who does a lot of the things that I'm talking about with a product owner. In that case, I would say they're actually the product owner. You know, it's a role, so it's not necessarily a person. If I'm with a really tiny company with 3 developers and 1 tester or something, you know, I might be doing some other stuff. I might be the DBA too or something. So, am I behind? Anybody? Anybody still need prizes? Yes?
From a traditional waterfall environment, I know everybody's been.
Hey, I was in that a long time.
So we have a product owner that gives the requirements and then does a dump and run.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not till we're just about ready to release stuff that this person comes riding in going, well, that's not what I wanted. And we're just not sure how to re-engage this person partway through the process
So, yeah, so the question was, I'm on waterfall and I have a dump and run product owner who comes back at the end and says, that's not what I want. Yeah, that's classic when I have a product owner that's really way outside the team. So the only thing we can do there is start to bring them in more, or your team may have to kind of fill that role, you know, and try to get more interaction with that product owner. Maybe they need some coaching, in case you know anybody that does anything like that. So any other, another question. Wow.
Do you have separate project managers? And if so, how does the product owner interact with the project manager?
So the question is, do we have separate product managers, project managers? And if so, how does the product owner interact with the project manager? We do not have a project manager. So there is no interaction. I interact a lot with the Scrum Master, who is probably as close as there is to any of the project management side of things. I also interact with the development manager, who is close to that. But one of the things I love about the place where I work is the team is very self-directed. So the team decides what they're going to do every day. The development manager is the epitome of a leader, servant leader, views his role as removing roadblocks like crazy stuff that our parent company wants us to do, you know, that type of thing. So they don't. But
My team is struggling. I'm a
right,
product manager. We have a product owner. We have a scrum master.
right,
So there's
right. But in the cases where you do have a project manager, yeah, the product owner and the project manager should be working together really closely. You know, in my situation, the project team is the project manager, and I work closely with them, you know, working through the sprint. So in your case, where it's the project manager who's filling some of that role, then yeah, there needs to be a really close relationship there. How can, as a tester, how can you help the ones that are less wonderful get better, or at least provide what you need? And again, that's a lot of just expectations. As a tester, you should expect that you have a close relationship with your product owner, and you should expect certain things out of the product owner, and you should expect that they want to hear certain things from you as well. And so having that expectation, establishing that line of communication, establishing that relationship with the product owner will go a long ways. And then in the case where you have product owners who maybe aren't quite so good at their job, or maybe, you know, novices or something, stepping in to help them out a little bit, you know, and just provide a little bit of what they're not providing, maybe model it a little bit to help them. And then, you know, coaching and things like that for the product owners. So does that help? A little bit.
well,
Yeah.
I think the biggest part is the ego.
Yeah, it's tough. You know, I think to be a good product owner, you can't have a huge ego, because it's really about being in between the two teams who both tend to have big egos. So if you do too, then it can be difficult. You know, that's human interactions and some of the same tools you have to deal with that. But I think, you know, if you're dealing with a product owner with a big ego, to some extent you have to stroke the ego a little bit, you know, just to get what you need out of them. So, okay, so I think we'll move on to the second half. So how does a product owner influence the product? So I see where the product owner's influence is in 4 fundamental areas. First of all, it's establishing business value. So in other words, what do we want to accomplish with the product? The next is defining release boundaries. So more specifics about how we want to implement the solution. Then it's establishing context. And that's all about how's it going to be used and why. And then there's the feedback loops. So are we successful and what's next? So Eileen had her nephew, I think it was, yesterday in her presentation, swimming. I should have had my son's picture here, pitching. I want to say a little bit about fundamentals versus styles. My son is a sophomore in high school. He's a pretty good high school pitcher. And so we work with pitching coaches all the time. And one of the things that really struck me about the way they talk about the pitching motion and things is they talk about fundamentals versus styles. And so the fundamentals are the things that everyone that's successful does these things. And the styles are kind of what makes them unique. So as an example, if I'm a pitcher, a fundamental of all good pitchers is that they have the ball kind of centered on their body when they start their windup. So they're balanced and they're ready to go. Now, some pitchers might keep the ball low when they start their windup. Other pitchers might bring their hands way over their head when they start their windup. But they're all keeping the ball in the middle of their body for that balance. So that illustrates the fundamental versus style. When you get to the style issues, it's not wrong as long as it doesn't affect the fundamental. So if I start a windup where I pull the ball this way, then I'm not following the fundamentals. So that style is getting in the way. But as long as the style doesn't get in the way of the fundamental, then, you know, I don't care. Do what you want. So with an Agile Scrum half, the fundamentals are the key essence of the role, what I just talked about. Styles are what are the tools, what are the techniques, what are the methodologies. And that's all really dependent on the circumstances. So the first fundamental I'd like to talk about is determining business value. And again, I reference David Hussman's presentation this morning. I loved his emphasis on the right requirement. It's about the right requirement, getting business value out of doing the right thing. It's not about doing the requirements right. I talked earlier about working for the development center where it was all about what's the perfect methodology and what's the perfect ER diagramming tool and those kind of things. That's not important. What's important is getting the right one into the process. So determining business value is about quantifying and verifying the value. It's about preserving business value throughout the development process. And it's about getting the desired business value out of the product. So through the entire life cycle, it's about establishing that value, it's quantifying it, and then testing to make sure that I'm getting it. So let's go back to the yeast analogy. So I said business value is about what we want to accomplish. So in the yeast world, there are two types of yeast, two main types of yeast. There's a top fermenting ale yeast, which ferments at a warmer temperature. And that produces a lot of flavor compounds because of the warmer temperatures and the type of yeast that give ale its distinct flavor. So that's ales, stouts, porters, things like that. And then there's the bottom fermenting lager yeast, which is fermented at a lower temperature. And that gives very distinctive flavors depending on the yeast and the temperature. That would be things like lagers, pilsners, Oktoberfest, that type of thing. And then there's the whole difference, and the guy from Basecamp was great on this yesterday. There's a difference between, take a Guinness, which supposedly has had the exact same yeast for well over 200 years. They have a very consistent flavor because they use the same yeast and same product, but same yeast. Whereas I might have some Belgian type beers like a sour beer or a lambic beer that introduce wild yeast. And in that case, it's a little bit unpredictable. So the different types of yeast that are used really end up with different flavors. And then there's this thing called anchor steam. I don't know if anybody's familiar with anchor steam, but a steam beer is actually a beer using lager yeast, so a yeast that's supposed to ferment at temperatures, and they ferment it at warmer temperatures. And when it ferments, it causes kind of a steam to rise off. So it's kind of the wild card in this, just showing you can be a little creative about how you want to do things. So let's start to fill up our toolbox with tools. I said there were styles, and for me, styles are really about tools and methodologies. There's no single right tool. I mean, I don't care what line of business you're in, what you're doing. There's no single right tool. There's no silver bullet. And I'm going to name a few tools to use as a Agile Scrum Half today, but it's just a representative set. It's not meant to be an authoritative list of all the tools in the category. So the specific tools that you'll use will depend on a lot of things about your environment. Are you agile or traditional? In the traditional environment, your tools are going to be very different than if you're in the agile environment. If you work for a large company, you have all the issues of multiple teams and multiple product owners. As a small company, I have a different set of issues, so I have different tools that I use. Am I working with a brand new greenfield kind of project where this has never been done before? The tools are going to be different than if you're in an environment like I am where it's a legacy system. It's been around for 10 years or so, and so it's a lot of improvements on that. So each one of those environments will lead to different tools. So no, I am not trying to say a product owner is a medieval dentist or anything like that. I just want to talk a little bit about tools. So what are the tools for determining business value? So as a representative set, I have that whole set of things that people use to state some kind of requirements. So they can be themes, epics, stories, requirements, features. I don't really care what you call those. That's all about trying to get a statement of the requirements. We personally use mostly stories. I also use themes, but I don't use themes like epics where we get in an epic and break it down. I use themes to organize a bunch of related stories so that we can talk about those as a group. Lean startup style experiments are a great way to define and test business value. We've just started to use those more and more. As I said, we've got a very small development team. I'm realizing we have a very wide breadth of things to deal with. If we get it wrong, we can waste a lot of time. And so we are constantly thinking now about how can I test that business value? Before I decide to put a quarter into this brand new feature, how can I test the value of that feature? What's the easiest thing that I can put out there? So I love that tool. And then there's negotiating the MVP, or minimum viable product. And I do really mean that's a negotiation. When you're working between the team and the product owner, it's a negotiation where the product owner is trying to retain as much value, the team is trying to retain as little work as possible to get the thing out the door. So working back and forth. So MVP is another really great tool for working through business value decisions. And I really do mean MVP as in minimum viable product, because I've also seen MVP as in minimum viable piece of crap, which is where I've stripped all the value out of it, and all I'm doing is producing a minimum something, but it really doesn't get into minimum value. So again, it's that negotiation. The most important tool as a product owner or Agile Scrum have is to be a skeptic. You have to trust but verify. So verification has to overcome a variety of biases and effects that just are psychologically in humans. I find that studying on these various biases and effects is really critical to my role, to understand how people are reacting. A really good example, and a really good example of this was with my stakeholder group. I had, when I first got there, they were prioritizing themes using a model which had about 5 categories, I think, and things were ranked 1 to 10, and each category was weighted. And so the theory was that once we assigned values to each one of the categories and weighted them and sorted them, we'd know exactly what the most important thing to do. But an interesting thing started happening. And what would happen is, in the stakeholder meetings, whoever threw out the first estimate of what the, let's say it's revenue, revenue, I think this is a 7 in revenue. The entire discussion anchored around the number 7. So nobody was really willing to come out and say, I think it's a 2, because of the anchoring effect. So understanding and recognizing those kind of things when they're happening is a really important skill to have. Some of my favorite sources on biases and effects like these are the Thinking Fast and Slow that I mentioned earlier by Daniel Kahneman, and then really any of the Dan Ariely books on behavioral economics. I see a bunch of people writing them down. I'll put those on Twitter. I'll put a few of those on Twitter so that you don't have to madly write. So I'd like to play a game. Looking for my pen. So the first part of this game is everybody has to stand up. Sorry about dumping your laptops and everything, but everybody has to stand up. Excellent. Shall we do jumping jack? No. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a sequence of numbers, 2, 4, 8. And a few of you may have seen this, and if you do, don't give it away. And I'm going to tell you that they obey a rule that I have in my head. And then I'm going to ask you to give me a number sequence, and I'll tell you whether it satisfies the rule. So you can test as many sequences as you want, but when you think you know the answer, sit down. Okay? So, we have to have more prizes. So, who wants to give the first sequence? Throw out a sequence.
20, 40, 80.
20, 40, 80. Okay. That satisfies the rule.
137.
137. That satisfies the rule. God, I hate doing this game with testers. 026. That satisfies the rule. Yes. Sorry, I'll just start tossing these. 99, 100, 101.
062.
That satisfies the rule, by the way. 062 does not satisfy the rule. ABC does. Depends on.
ACE.
If we're in hex, I think that works, right? I don't know. Maybe. Yes? 000. 000 does not satisfy the rule. Wow, nobody's sitting down yet. You're a tough audience. 147, 3,542 does satisfy. Wow, a lot more sitting. 1, 2, 3 satisfies. 0.1.2 satisfies. Sort of. Only because I didn't include one rule in my head. Yes? 101, 10101 satisfies. All right. Wow, I've got a couple of holdouts here.
$! Exclamation point.
Does not. Okay. 5, 4, 20? 12, 4, 20. 5, 12, 20 does satisfy. You're the last holdout.
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, we'll continue on. I'll assume that you sat down. So the rule is that each number, so because it was number, they didn't, but each number must be larger than the one before it. So some interesting things happen here psychologically with people. One is that most people start off with the assumption that if I'm asking you to solve a problem, that number one, it's got to be complex. So I immediately go to what? Things like each number's double the one before, maybe x squared, x cubed, if you really want to get mathematical about it. But you start thinking about those things. Also, a lot of people think it's a contest. I never said it was a contest. I just said we were going to play a game. So it was all about how can I sit down the fastest, right? How can I figure this out to sit down the fastest? So really, once you've come up with that theory, confirmation bias kicks in. So it's all about how do I confirm my opinion? And you saw, I mean, how many of these did we see confirming? We had one that didn't, one that didn't. So we had a lot of confirming kind of things. And most people sat down after confirming their opinion. And, you know, confirmation bias, that's exactly what happens, is we stop looking for evidence that might yield a no. So the New York Times ran this game in their upshot column online. And an interesting thing about that was they kind of ran an experiment. They recorded how many guesses people did and what types of guesses before they made an answer of what the rule was. 78% guessed the answer without ever getting a negative result. So they didn't do any negative testing at all. All we did was happy path, right? Kind of what we did here with a whole set of tests. Oh, okay. Only a very small percentage of the people, 9% of the people that did that game online, actually got 2 negative answers before they tried to guess. So there, it's, you know, confirmation bias is powerful, even when you know it. I mean, you knew we were playing a game where I was trying to illustrate some point, and yet it kicks in. So let's move to the next fundamental. The next fundamental is implementable unit of of business value. So we're defining our release boundaries. It's all about an implementable unit of business value. So if I'm on a Scrum team, I'm doing 2-week sprints, I need to have a much smaller implementable unit of business value than if I'm on a traditional project, say an 18-month project, I can have much bigger ones. So it really differs according to the size of the project. So it's all about what features fit into the time box. You know, how can I get value out of that time box? Or alternatively, if I'm looking at a fixed set of things to deliver, what is the time box that I need? So I'm varying one of the factors. It's also about when is it good enough? When is it ready to release? So you'll notice I said release boundaries. I very specifically used the word boundary, not scope. I like the word boundary because it's an imaginary line. This isn't so imaginary, but it's an imaginary line dividing two things, where scope is about what I can see. So boundary is about how far I choose to go. How far do I want to go? I don't want to cross the boundary, but I want to be able to see what's out there. And if something looks important enough, maybe I bring it inside the boundary. Or maybe I've got something inside the boundary that needs to be thrown overboard. So it's all about, to me, it's all about boundary, not scope. So it's as far as I want to go, not as far as I can see. I don't want those blinders on. So what are tools for defining release boundaries? Theme roadmaps. I love to use theme roadmaps to kind of define out, this is one approach. David Hussman was talking about journeys. I'm glad he did because I finally understand what those are now, and I'm going to start to use them. Story maps. Project milestones. So if I'm on a waterfall project, I have big project milestones. But those all define release boundaries. One of my favorite tools now is the story map. So that one's a little hard to see, but essentially on a story map, I'm looking at process and steps kind of across the top. The first couple rows across the top, the first one's missing there. Below that, I have stories that are the yellow cards. So those are various stories that make up either building that feature or building out that step or improving the step. In our case, it's almost always improving on one of those steps. And then the blue line defines, here's a release. So everything, I can float stories up above that and define these are part of release 1, these are part of release 2. And they can float, you know, if I don't quite get everything done in one sprint and I have to push something out. But it gives me a really visual tool to see how we're defining releases. And then the other little variation I use is I like to use these red cards to indicate questions. So it's a great tool. Check out information on it if you're doing any kind of release planning. As David said earlier, Jeff Patton is, I guess, kind of the inventor. So now we'll get to my favorite fundamental, which is establishing context. This is probably the key fundamental. It's the thing that if you don't do anything else as an Agile Scrum half, it's bringing context to the team. So context is about who uses the product, why do they use the product, why do they want it to do what it does, and how badly do they want it, so their priorities. A number of years ago, I wrote an article on chartering as context. And even over the years, chartering is still one of my favorite tools for establishing context. An interesting note from my research when I was putting this talk together is that yeast is affected by context. So I can use the same yeast in 2 different environments, and I will get very different beer. So there are Belgian beers that use American yeast, but they produce a very Belgian flavor off that yeast because of the environment that they're in. This reminds me of the whole argument about, are you agile enough, or anything like that. They have the same argument in beer because If I'm using an American yeast for a Belgian beer, I have to kind of hide the fact because people don't think it's Belgian. But that just isn't true. So I really think if it tastes good, then the process was successful. So context tools. Context tools are vision and charter. You know, great tools for establishing context. I use themes a lot. So either coarse grained stories or some kind of an organizing theme. Also at the practical day-to-day level, answering teams' questions, working business procedures for the business folks. So an Agile Scrum Half, you know, you're not the person that has to create the vision necessarily. Vision can come from anywhere. It can come from anybody. But the thing you do have to do is you have to guard that vision throughout the process. You have to guide the team to that vision, because ultimately it's about fulfilling that vision. And then finally, feedback loops, the opportunities for learning. That's what feedback loops are about. So I have process feedback loops about the delivery of the product. I have product feedback loops. So how much does it get used? Are there changes in how it gets used? And the quality of the product. So what's the perception of the product? What are the defect rates? How usable is it? There are feedback loops at every stage. And that's where we're connecting with the test teams. And so, you know, it's so important to design in these feedback loops. So as part of the product owner's role is to establish these feedback loops, to specify feedback loops, to let the team know where do we need feedback, where do we maybe need to capture data so that we can learn more about our product. In the beer world, that's about beer tasting. So the big question that they're answering and they're judging a beer is it correct for the intended style? So if I intended to create an imperial stout, does it taste like an imperial stout? It's also about how does the beer look? So if I leave the yeast in or take the yeast out, it's going to look very different. One's going to be clear, one's not going to be. The mouth feel. So how does it feel in my mouth? And the flavor. So what tools do we use for feedback loops? Primary tool is acceptance tests. We also use metrics, both leading and trailing metrics, to figure out, you know, what feedback on our product. We do demos to users. I like to use shadowing. So I go out and work with users. I get to see how they're actually using the product and getting that feedback. Another thing is surveys. We've started to use a lot of surveys. Our company is historically bad at talking directly to customers and finding out what they want. So we discovered a little while ago, hey, this might actually be useful if we go out and ask people how they like our product and what they're doing with it. And one of the tools we're using is surveys. We put out a new homepage for people who have 401k accounts. And on that homepage, we put a link to a survey. And we continue to get 3 or 4 results. And one of the things we've done is we've asked for contact information. Said, we'd love to contact you, you know, give us contact information, and we will. And I'm amazed. At least 3/4 of the people are giving us contact information. People want to give feedback on the products they use. So now that the toolbox is full and it's getting lots of use, what's the next challenge for the Agile Scrum Half? And it's really, for me, it's linking up with the test teams throughout the life cycle to influence the quality. So I'm going to use a simple 3-stage life cycle. Everybody has 3 or 4. And so I'm going to talk about plan it, build it, and use it. As an Agile Scrum Half, in my day, I probably am in each one of these stages at one point during the day. There's hardly a day that goes by that I'm not in at least 2. So I might be working with the stakeholder group in the morning to establish some priorities, short-term priorities. And then A little later in the day, I'm in the stand-up and I'm answering a lot of questions from the team. And then in the afternoon, I might be working with users to get them ready for things that are coming out or understanding how they're using something. So I'm in all of those. And I view that the key relationship in all of this for the product owner is with the test team. And it's not a one-way street. I get as much, if not more, from the test team than they get from me. I hope they're getting something from me as well. So let's briefly walk through the life cycle. So the first step is the plan it step. Here, context is feeding the quality. So it's all about establishing context. Context is things like, what's the value? What are the priorities? Do we have risk? And what's the importance? And not only the importance, but to whom is it important? Or sequence. So is there a timeline when I need to have this product done? When I'm in planning, the people on the team that I spend the most time with outside of the stakeholders is probably the test team. Because I can work with them to kind of set up and get them ready for things coming so that they can be prepared to test. Their feedback really helps me in the planning process to know where things need to be better defined, where things might have some limitations. I've got a couple of the senior testers that I bounce ideas off all the time, just to better understand, where should we be going with the product. And then at times I'll even sit down with the test team and go through their automated tests. And the reason is that I want to know what is the expectation we have of the system today. So that's not always real visible. But if I can look at the test, I know exactly what the team expected to deliver back 8 years ago when they wrote that code. Now when we get into the build it, really the primary relationship between me and the testers are the acceptance tests. So in my environment, I write the initial acceptance tests. And then we start a process of going back and forth. So the testers are asking me lots of questions. The team does too, but I find the testers really ask me most of the questions. And working through that, it helps me identify where there are holes, where there are ambiguities. So it's all those good things that we learn out of acceptance tests. Getting those detailed answers really helps to clarify the outcomes we're looking for. You can't test everything, especially in Casey Rosenthal's presentation yesterday when he was talking about this whole systemic uncertainty. You can't test everything. You can't even begin to test everything. But the context that I'm bringing to the tests through the process of what I'm doing helps the test team to focus on which acceptance tests are appropriate, which automated tests are appropriate. So where should we focus our testing? My good friend Ken Pugh down here talked yesterday. I hope many of you were here, or all of you were here. He'll tell you more than I'll ever know about acceptance tests. So if you want to know more about that, he's got a workshop tomorrow. Finally, in the use it stage, this is one of the most important feedback loops for learning about quality. So here, we're identifying what I like to call interesting uses of the product, maybe unintended uses of the product. We're looking for defects. Also, I'm really trying to look for where people have developed workarounds to the way we've developed the product that indicate there's a hole. There's a feature that's needed. An example, we started out supporting mostly small companies. So within the 401k plan administrators page, they have what's called a census list. So it's a list of all the employees in the company. Well, when we were dealing with companies that had 5 to 10 employees, that was pretty good. Now we've got some customers that have over 2,000 employees. And when our answer is, now on this page that has 2,000 employees, use Control F, that indicates we probably have a feature that we should implement. Observations of the real world really help drive both how I'm going to do my testing. So as I find interesting uses out in the world, I bring those back to the test team. That may be a new test. That may be, oh, we better automate that because we want to make sure that works the way it's really supposed to work. And it also informs the planning process. So today I proposed a very specific role for product owner that I called Agile Scrum Half. So we talked about what makes a good product owner. So one of the key elements of that is product owner puts the ball in, but they also get it out. And I think that's really key to the role. How we influence the product is through the 4 fundamentals. So the business value, release boundaries, context, and feedback loops. And finally, what does that mean to the product quality? It's really all about building in quality at every stage and the close relationship between the product owner and the test team. So I hope I accomplished my original mission. So for the product owners out there, I hope you got some different ways to look at the role. And for those of you working with product owners, hope maybe I tweaked your expectations. So when you go back, maybe you have a little different expectation from your product owner. And then for those of you that didn't have a product owner, I hope that maybe I raised your expectations. So I just want to leave you with the idea that yeast is good for beer. Product owner is also good for quality software. So any questions? I think we've got a few minutes left, right? 11? It's somewhere between 11 and 6. So we'll be... So questions?
I'm going to come back to you. So how do you personally, what's your personal quality initiative?
Excuse me?
What are your personal quality initiatives?
What are my personal quality initiatives? Oh, so the question is, what are my personal quality initiatives? That's a good question. You know, right now the biggest issue I'm dealing with is how we get good priorities and then test those priorities to see if they made sense. So I'd say the quality initiative we're really looking for, and the tool we're trying to use more is experiments to get the business value. But it's all about the quality of the priorities coming into the process. As I said, that it was a big aha moment for me when I saw the 8 teams that were doing the breadth of what our team. It suddenly dawned on me, why is it so important that we get good priorities? So getting priorities, testing those priorities, that's probably my number 1 right now. You already got one, right?
I've got more than one kid.
You got more than 2?
Yeah.
Okay, other questions? What's that? Oh, I know. Well, I told you I wasn't a scrum half. You know, I was a fly half. I punted the ball a lot, so maybe I should try kicking it. Okay, I think I had a question over here.
One thing you didn't touch on too much was grooming.
Grooming?
Being able to groom properly and being able to, first of all, being able to write stories so that grooming people understand what you're actually trying to get after. That's one of the things that we're working with our product owner right now.
Right.
If you're not clear with what you're asking and you're making sure that each acceptance is a single acceptance and it fits in, we just say, go back and rewrite this.
Yeah.
We're not going to sit here and help you write stories.
Right. So the question was about grooming, what I do for grooming. In our environment, we have a couple of places where the grooming starts to happen. The first is in estimation. So we do an estimation meeting once a sprint, and I bring in the stories that have the highest likelihood of being in, the next quarter or so. and to get estimates. And the estimates are really for me. They're not for the team. They're for me to work with the business folks to help them understand when things might come based on the priorities they set. So we start the grooming process there, where the kind of questions I get out of the estimation helps me further develop the story. And then once a sprint, usually about 3 or 4 days before the sprint planning meeting, we do a sprint pre-planning meeting. And that really is what I would consider a grooming meeting. And that's where we get down to the very specifics about the story so that it will be ready on Friday when we do sprint planning. So it's those 2 meetings. And then in between, you know, I'll go back and forth with business folks. I'll do shadowing to understand what the needs are. And I'll work with the testers to make sure that the acceptance test makes sense and I really have stated everything that needs to be stated. So, good question. Do you have multiple kids that you need extras? Okay. Okay. Questions? Yes?
You talked about the difference between product owners, product managers. I don't think you and your company have product managers.
We do have product managers. Yep.
And do you have those at the same ratio? Do they work together one-to-one?
So the question is, does my company have product managers? And yes, we do. The product management comes from the parent company. So there's a certain amount of tension there anyway, because they kind of want to have big initiatives that make sense for the entire business. And if you remember, we're this little kind of tail on the dog. And so there's a little bit of tension back and forth there. But they are an equal member in the stakeholder group setting priorities. They have a little bit more equal work in some of the upfront work. And they're my eyes to the outside world. So they're really looking at the market. They're looking at where's the 401k industry going and what do we need to have. So they bring all of that perspective in. In the parent company, the product managers serve as the product owners. And they bring the stories into the teams. I'm not sure I really like that because they suffer from all of the things we talked about, where they don't have time for the teams. They generally just kind of show up with some priorities, and they're not available all the time, you know, like I am. So, other questions? Yes. Okay.
A lot of good products come as a result of that communication in that regard. And there are a lot of times where the project owner or the project manager almost avoids that team because they don't want to hear the bad news.
Right.
Is there, I noticed that you touched on the processes that sort of incorporate that communication, but without those processes established, is there language or something that can be used to promote that communication?
Okay, so the question was, it's that relationship between the product owner, product manager, test team, but it's mostly between the test team and a product owner who's kind of moving the product forward where the test team is trying to find issues. My recommendation there is to start to use the right language. So talk about the business value. So it's not about a failing test. It's what's that going to cause? You know, if this fails, we're going to lose X amount of money. You know, if I have a test that deals with trading mutual funds and we do that wrong, we could get penalized. We could trade and give somebody more money than they really deserve. And so I think the challenge for the test team really is to, you know, think in terms of business value. Provide the message. It's the same message, just a little bit different terms. Does that help? Perfect. Yes?
So I have 2 questions. One is that you're the product owner.
Yes.
What's your role?
Yep.
Do you have any other roles besides the product owner at your company? And system architect,
Right.
maybe, not the product owner either. Who to merge and, from traditional.
Okay, so to summarize the question, the first question was, do I have other roles in my company? And no, I'm a full-time product owner. And I love the fact that they decided to do that. I think I talked earlier that my predecessor split the role. And one of the things that they really found was that caused a lot of disruptions in the process. They joked that the day one of the sprint, every story was blocked because they were waiting on the product owner. So they hired me to fill that role full time. They had decided to be a full-time role. And so I'm grateful that they decided that. The second question was kind of how do you transition from a traditional into an agile, and where does your product owner come from? And from a traditional type of an environment, business analysts are probably a pretty good candidate. I would look for the people that really get excited about that in between, that can go talk to the business folks and understand their language, but understand enough about the technical side. I was a programmer. I did data modeling. I've done a lot of database work way back. Version 2 of DB2 on the IBM mainframe. So that tells you how long I've been at it. So I have a lot of those technical skills just good enough that I don't get, I can be the skeptic and I can ask the questions. So look for that type of person. Every project has it. It's the programmer that kind of likes programming but really likes to go talk to the users. So we send them over to talk to the users every time because nobody else wants to. That's the type of person to look for. Does that help? Good. Any other questions? I think we're over time now. So thank you very much.